There is no law precluding John Hlophe from or taking up this position in the JSC.
Well, the Constitution requires actions to be rational, and we're saying that this is not rational. We're saying it's completely unreasonable, and anybody, as you say, who applies common sense to the situation will come to the conclusion that it's irrational.
You would not object if the MK party decided to field a different candidate. In other words, it's not about the party, but about the person.
The only thing that Parliament has to keep in mind when it nominates people to sit on the Judicial Service Commission is that 3 of those people have to come from opposition parties. And so we don't say that MK has no right to nominate someone. Of course they do. But they must just nominate someone who is a fit and proper person to be there. So he was found unfit and proper to be a judge in the first place. And he popped up in MK after the selection, is the leader of MK in Parliament, and MK then nominated him to be their representative on the Judicial Service Commission. Now, it is completely absurd for someone who's...
Guys, Helen Zille is taking the battle head on with the Parliament as regards the appointment of Judge Hloppe on the Judicial Service Commission. Let's listen to this real powerful interview where she breaks down the move that the DA has actually just initiated, which she calls an urgent interdiction as a move to stop Hloppe's appointment on the Judicial Service Commission.
Now, Freedom Under Law and AfriForum, I believe, have both filed application. Would it not have been better to join them because they're essentially making the same points that you are making?
Well, we launched first, actually, so perhaps they should have joined us. We didn't make any media statement when we did launch first, and it's not a competition. We've both got different points to make, and we're taking different points. So our case is in 2 parts. The first part is to interdict Dr. Hlophe from taking up his seat at the Judicial Services Commission so that he cannot participate in the appointment process of new judges, including one to fill his own vacant position of the Judge President of the Western Cape. That's the first part of our action. The second part is to get a court judgment that the National Assembly erred when they designated John Hlophe to be a political representative on the Judicial Services Commission. And we say that the Parliament erred because it is irrational and undermines the independence and integrity of the judiciary to have a situation where a former judge who was impeached primarily through the Judicial Services Commission and then through Parliament, for such a judge or a former judge to then be put back onto the Judicial Service Commission to choose other judges and partake in disciplinary processes potentially against other judges. So that is irrational. It undermines the independence of the judiciary and it undermines the integrity of the judiciary. So we're saying Parliament did not have to designate John Hlophe just because MK nominated him. Parliament had to apply its mind before designating somebody to represent a political party on the Judicial Service Commission.
And to someone who says, look, I mean, maybe logic and common sense would dictate to everyone exactly what you've just said. However, there is no law precluding John Hlophe from or taking up this position in the JSC.
Well, the Constitution requires actions to be rational, and we're saying that this is not rational. We're saying it's completely unreasonable, and anybody, as you say, who applies common sense to the situation will come to the conclusion that it's irrational.
Now, is it not a matter, because AfriForum has argued, for example, that this is the Constitutional Court has this falls within its exclusive matters. They can exclusively determine this issue. Is that necessarily the case? In other words, can't Parliament pilot legislation that specifically precludes someone who is in the position that John Hloppe is in? In other words, taking someone who has been declared to be unfit to be a judge to a body that's responsible for appointing judges.
Well, obviously, no one thought that this absurd situation would arise.
Exactly.
One can't legislate for everything. And certainly the drafters of our Constitution could never have imagined that this kind of thing was happening or would happen. That is just how absurd it is. So the thing is, we haven't gone to the Constitutional Court first, as AfriForum has. We've gone to the Western Cape High Court to say that we want an order from the court that Parliament made a mistake. They erred in saying that they had no option but to put forward MK's nomination. Of course, MK has the right to nominate someone, but Parliament doesn't have the obligation to accept anybody who is nominated, even if it creates a conflict of interests, even if it undermines the independence of the judiciary, even if it is irrational. Despite the fact that there isn't a specific law, it goes against very foundational principles in the Constitution.
And you would not object if the MK party decided to field a different candidate? In other words, it's not about the party, but about the person.
The only thing that Parliament has to keep in mind when it nominates people to sit on the Judicial Service Commission is that 3 of those people have to come from opposition parties. And so we don't say that MK has no right to nominate someone. Of course they do. But they must just nominate someone who is a fit and proper person to be there.
And John Hloppe is not that person?
No, because he was impeached. He was found not fit and proper to be a judge. So how can he be sitting on a body that nominates judges for appointment?
Until this matter is determined by the court, he stays.
Well, we're seeking an urgent interdict. That's why it is urgent. And if there's an interdict, then he won't be able to sit on the Judicial Service Commission when it does its interviews later this year.
Interesting, guys. Watch this next video where she goes deeper in explaining what she means by an urgent interdiction.
Hi, everyone. As most of you will know, the Judicial Service Commission is a very important constitutional structure in our democracy, and its key role is to interview prospective judges and nominate them to the President for appointment, and also to discipline judges when they commit misconduct or alleged misconduct. And so the caliber of people on the Judicial Service Commission is make or break for our democracy. We have to have people who understand the law, very significant numbers of them, who are beyond reproach, and our Constitution makes provision to have some politicians on the Judicial Service Commission as well. In the last weeks, Parliament has nominated a list of people representing different political parties to the Judicial Service Commission. Amongst them is former Judge John Hloppe, who was the Judge President of the Western Cape until he was removed and impeached for gross misconduct, a finding made by the Judicial Service Commission that went to Parliament, who voted that he should be removed as a judge. So he was found unfit and proper to be a judge in the first place. And he popped up in MK after the selection, is the leader of MK in Parliament, and MK then nominated him to be their representative on the Judicial Service Commission. Now, it is completely absurd for someone who's been removed as a judge for gross misconduct to sit on the very body that interviews and recommends judges for appointment and that plays such a crucial role in disciplining judges. It is irrational, and that's one of the grounds on which we are seeking the remedy by going to court. It also completely undermines the independence of the judiciary and the integrity of the process of choosing judges. So we've gone to court, firstly to ask the court to interdict John Hloppe from taking up his seat on the Judicial Service Commission for the next round of judicial interviews. And then we've also asked the court to say to Parliament that they erred in putting John Hloppe onto the Judicial Service Commission while MK is allowed a representative, of course, they just cannot have somebody who has been removed from being a judge for gross misconduct.
Yeah, what do you think? Really interesting. The whole issue with the fact of Hloppe being impeached and having been appointed by the same body that impeached him has been a problem by both the FF Plus and the DA, and this move by the DA now in terms of this urgent interdiction is actually a really unprecedented move. I think no one actually saw it coming. I knew that actually anyway there would have been a way in which some of the parties would have taken this case to the court, but the case of this urgent interdiction seems to be a statutory position, at least in court, that stops, first of all, the functions of Hloppe. So in other words, Hloppe is not even going to be able to begin his functionings at the JSC if the urgent interdiction is actually moved and successful in the court. But it actually paralyzes his functions in the courts. But then secondly, the overall objective would now be to take him out of the whole system and then probably have someone else from the MK party to be appointed on that seat on the Judicial Service Commission. And we know that the MK party might not have someone else as like a judge to really, represent and the level of Judge Hloppe, at the level of Judge Hloppe's representation on the JSC, which would mean the paralysis from the perspective of the opposition, because I don't also know if the EFF would be able to employ Dalin Pofu to represent him on, because I don't really know if he has served at the capacity as a judge. So Judge Hloppe is actually the one from the opposition, as Helen Zille speaks about in this video, that, the foundations or the requirement to set up a person, appoint a person, a nominee on the Judicial Service Commission, is that it must be from the official opposition. Now we know that the official opposition for this GNU seems to be the Progressive Caucus, to which Judge Hloppe is actually represents what might be, or what possibly might be a judge in that regard. And so probably if this comes to the fore, if it's successful with this urgent interdiction, I really don't know if it might be possible to really find someone from the core opposition, or the opposition will have to rally around for someone else that probably might serve its interests as John Hloppe would. But anyway, it might actually be a blow to the progressives. The fact that, they had nominated an appointee, but then that appointee had to be uprooted by, for the force of the law, as pushed by the DA and probably the FF Plus. But anyway, it's really interesting what's going on. We'll keep studying and understanding what happens to Dr. John Hloppe's appointment on the Judicial Service Commission. What do you guys think about this video and her speech, Helen Zille's speech here in this video? Share your thoughts in the comments.